My name, okay, this is a talk into the mouth of the microphone. My name's Greg Mackey, and in my day job I have the privilege of leading the History Trust of South Australia. Today my role is really simply that of Master of Ceremonies. I start by offering an acknowledgement that the land upon which we meet today is Kaurna country, and pay respects to Kaurna elders past and present. I recognise that while sovereignty was never ceded to European settlers, this land remains of spiritual significance to living Kaurna. Plaques here on the Vardon Avenue arches to replace the long lost but historically significant plaques that between them celebrated an important part of the history of the old Adelaide Fruit and Produce Exchange here in Adelaide's colourful East End. These replica plaques will attest to the colourful past purpose that brought this part of Adelaide to life. Before we move on, I'm delighted to extend special welcomes to members of the Brooker and Bishop families, too many to single out today. Bill James, descendant of one of the inaugural members of the board of the Adelaide Fruit and Produce Exchange, representatives of the SA Produce Market, Angelo DeMasi, the CEO, David Weston, the pattern maker who made the original casts for the replica plaques, and Douglas Shiripa, a member of the South Australian Chamber of Fruit and Vegetables and president of that body at the time that the old markets moved to Paraka. And also a welcome to Ranjit Anderson, the owner of the building over on whose columns the plaques will be revealed today. I'd also just like to very quickly acknowledge a few apologies that have been received, notable apologies received for today's occasion. The Honourable Julie Bishop, who is a descendant of H.J. Bishop, and Peter, Shirley and Bronwyn Fitzgerald, who are great-great-grandchildren of T.H. Booker. There'll also be a special place in Produce Heaven for the generous donors who contributed to bringing this project to life. Those of you here today know who you are. It would be remiss of me not to express the family's collective gratitudes to the team from the City of Adelaide, in particular Ross Whitfield, who is an apology today. Nothing quite like the death of a royal, of a monarch to play havoc with public sector priorities. But Ross particularly was helpful in the planning and installation of these two plaques that will shortly be revealed. And I'd also like to thank the City of Adelaide for their commitment to their future care. City of Adelaide has a proud record of recognising and supporting the preservation of the heritage of our city. Now, to say a few words about their family journeys and connection to the old Adelaide Fruit and Produce Exchange, please welcome a descendant of the Booker family, long-time respected South Australian historian, Dr. Judith Raftery.
Greg, I'm very pleased to be speaking at this significant event. One of the two men we are honouring today, Thomas Henry Brooker, was my great-grandfather. One of the two men we are honouring today, Thomas Henry Brooker, was my great-grandfather. The other, Henry James Bishop, always known as Harry, was John Bishop's grandfather. We are honouring these men today because they were honoured in their own day for their signal contributions to the early years of the Adelaide Fruit and Produce Exchange. They were honoured in a way that no other members of the exchange management have been. The Adelaide Fruit and Produce Exchange, established in 1903, often known as the New Market, together with the older and quite separate East End Market, which was established in the 1870s, were central to the economic and social life of the East End until their relocation to Paraka in 1986. They are still fondly remembered, those early markets, by many Adelaideans, many of whom claim to have worked here in after-school or holiday jobs. Before Brooker joined the inaugural Board of Directors of the Adelaide Fruit and Produce Exchange in 1903, he was prominent in public life, in the church, in sporting and community organisations, as chairman of the Board of Directors of the Adelaide Botanic Garden, chair of the West Torrens Council, and as a member of the South Australian Parliament. He served as Government Whip in the Kingston and Holder administrations and as Minister for Education and Industry in the Jenkins government. Bishop, who joined the board in 1925, and about whom John Bishop will say more in a few moments, has been more closely associated with the core business of the market as a founder and managing director of the firm of wholesale fruit merchants Silbert, Sharp and Bishop. Both men served the Adelaide Fruit and Produce Exchange with distinction, and at the time of their deaths, their service was celebrated by their colleagues through the commissioning of commemorative tablets, similar to the ones we're unveiling today. The originals, which were paid for partly by public subscription and partly by the Adelaide Fruit and Produce Exchange Company, were made by a local craftsman, W.H. Harding, to a dignified classical design. They were installed in a prominent position outside the market office, in the heart of this market precinct, and remained there until the market site was redeveloped and the market itself was relocated in the 1980s. What happened to the Plaques then remains a mystery. Despite exhaustive searching over many years, and despite some tantalising leads, they remain lost and unaccounted for. Hence today's event. A few of us, descendants of Thomas Henry Brooker and of Harry Bishop, decided to replace the lost plaques, not only to honour our forebears' contributions to the early life of the East End, but also to make our own contribution to preserving the history of the precinct and enriching its ongoing life. We are very grateful for the encouragement and support, technical, organisational and financial, that we've received from the History Trust of South Australia, especially from Greg Mackey, who's championed the project all the way, from the Adelaide City Council, who've accepted responsibility for installing and maintaining the plaques, and the South Australia Produce Market, which is the heir to the Adelaide Fruit and Produce Exchange and the East End market. In addition, we are delighted to commend the creative skills and expertise of pattern maker David Weston and the team of workers at Adelaide Brass Castings, who are responsible for the design and manufacture of the plaques. We are relieved that this day has arrived and very pleased with the plaques. I'm going to contradict Greg and say they're not replicas of the originals, but nor are they dissimilar from them. They retain the original wording, and we believe they reflect the spirit and intention of the originals. Long may they remind visitors to and residents of the East End of Thomas Henry Brooker, Henry James Bishop, and the vibrant history of the Adelaide Fruit and Produce Exchange. Thank you for being
On behalf of the Bishop family. And John, I also want to acknowledge that I reckon it was 5 or 6 years ago, not long after I started at the History Trust, that you called me up for a coffee and put this challenge and this gap and this opportunity to me. And I want to commend you and your family and Judith for your persistence with this. Some good things are worth waiting for. So ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, Mr. John Bishop AM.
Thank you very much indeed, and I'm going to resort to a bit of reading because my memory's terrible these days, and I'm not even sure who I am at times. But my grandfather, Henry James Bishop, was born in 1878 to a fruit and vegetable growing family at Eldervale near Moreton Summit. He was baptised as Henry James, and as you've heard, he preferred to be called Harry. So Harry will be for the rest of my discussion. Now, Geoffrey Bishop, who's here today, was his brother wrote a book that There Cherries Grow, the Bishops of Eldervale. And it's a very interesting story of the history of the family, and I've resorted to quite a bit of reference to Geoffrey's book in the few little notes that I've made. Harry worked in the East End market, and in 1905, with the help of his father, John James Bishop, he acquired the South Australian operations of a Western Australian firm of Silbert and Sharp and set them up as Silbert, Sharp and Bishop in Adelaide. Harry served as managing director of Silbert, Sharp and Bishop from 1905 onwards and built up a thriving business for over 30 years. In 1920, he was invited by Thomas Brooker, the chairman of the Adelaide Fruit and Produce Exchange, to join the board. And in Brooker's retirement in 1928, he became chairman, a position which he held for a further 10 years until his death in 1938 at the age of only 60. The business that he established eventually became, if not one, largest of the largest buildings operations in the markets. As it happens, I now live in an apartment on the corner of East Terrace and Grenfell Street, which used to be Silbert, Sharp Bishop's drive-through potato store, so I can say good day with potatoes every now and again. Apart from his market activities, Harry had a number of commercial interests, and among other things, he had a very good sense of humour. He was a great friend of Tom Plaques, who became Premier of South Australia in 1938. We have a letter written, dated 8th of November 1938, from the newly appointed Premier to Harry. My father tells me that Harry had written to Tom congratulating him on becoming Premier and enclosing an order for one new hat from Levers, saying he hoped Tom wouldn't need to change for a bigger hat later in his term. The Premier's reply was, "Please accept my sincere thanks for your letter of the 4th, conveying congratulations on my accession to office as Premier, and also for the open order for a hat. This is the first time I've got something for nothing from you. I value the order so much, I'm very loath to part with it. At present, I'm attaining estimates for framing it." And what I found out from my father, that was Tom's way of saying he was never going to cash the voucher, because he never said he would accept anything for his other salary as Premier. Sadly, the original plates have been lost, and the two families are most grateful for the support given by the History Trust, particularly in the City Council, particularly allowing us to restore the plates within the actual precinct of the market. I must say thank you to my son Jamie, who's spent an enormous amount of time for many, many years. Fantastic, really been superb. And so well done, he'll be delighted when today's over, I'm sure. So on behalf of the Bishop family, I thank you for coming, and it'll be my pleasure to unveil the plaque in due course.
Very much. I must say at the beginning that when my father first started here in 1936 here on East Terrace, he always came home and spoke the name Bishop, so it's been part of our growing up in this marketplace. The East End Market, what a vibrant place this was in the 50s to the 80s in particular. Growers would come from all over, from the Adelaide Hills, the Plains, the Riverland, and they bring their produce here to sell to the retailers, which in those days amounted to many hundreds. We had greengrocer shops all over the state, not just in Adelaide but in all the country areas. Most growers will get here between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, with the retailers arriving at about 4 a.m. to pick out their produce and to pay for it. In those days we weren't allowed to deliver it to the retailers' trucks till 7 a.m, so there was a mad rush at 7 o'clock because the retailers all had to get back to their shops by 9 o'clock to start setting up and selling it. Everything in those days was done by hand, and I'm sure some of the older Bishop family remember lumping bags of spuds and everything like that to weigh 40, 50 kilos, not 5 or 10 kilos like today. It was hard work, but it was fun. Once the forklift started, more and more vehicles were coming into the city working. It became quite bedlam, so they allowed us to start delivering at 6 a.m. so we could clear the streets. And in those days, cars would be parked all up, trucks would be parked all up Rundle Street, both sides, all up Grenfell Street, both sides, East Terrace, both sides, and also in the middle of East Terrace. And then cars were trying to get through to get into the city. So you can imagine what it was like. It got quite dangerous. It was decided by a few of us that we needed to build a new market out of the city. So we devised a plan and getting all users, growers, wholesalers and retailers to several meetings to devise a plan to move and build a new market. The South Australian Chamber of Fruit and Vegetables, which I was chairman at the time, in fact my father was an original member back in 1936, was the driving force with John Eakins, Vic Zarella and myself to lead the charge on planning and building the new market. Once we got everyone in agreement, then the plans were done and we moved out there in 1988, and it's become the hub of fruit and vegetables in South Australia. Of course today a lot of the produce is delivered directly to supermarket distribution centres, but the market is still there to source most of the fruit and vegetables and also to set prices, which is good for the industry. Certainly the market does not have the atmosphere that we had here at the old East End market. It was something special. But operations are much more conducive to modern standards and allows fresh produce to be delivered around the state much more quickly and freshly today. However, most of us who worked here and traded at the old East End will always have fond memories of the hustle and bustle and the trading and the friendships formed. They were great days.
In their hands, and I'm going to invite Judith Raftery and John Bishop to do the honours of pulling back the covers, and we can at the same time raise a toast in celebration.